Welcome to the 76th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, we'll talk about our favorite and least favorite game mechanics. I'm Adam.
And I'm Matt.
And this is the GameFor Podcast. GameFor is a platform to help connect tabletop gamers and to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. Matt and I are part of a software development design company called MilkCan, and because most of the folks at MilkCan love tabletop games, we developed the GameFor app and launched it in early 2018. We launched this companion podcast in June of 2019 to help tabletop gamers get more enjoyment out of their hobby. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we hibernated the GameFor app in July of 2020 and plan to bring back a retooled version of the app for Android, iOS, and the web when gaming in person is safer. Until then, we'll keep bringing you this podcast to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. I got it the first try this time.
Yeah.
I know, that was something. So, speaking of tabletop gaming, what have you been doing?
So I think it was over this last weekend before last. I don't know. It was in the last week or so.
Was it when I was in Boston, or was it this?
I think it was
weekend?
when you were in Boston.
Okay, so that's 2 weekends ago. Got it.
Yeah, I don't remember what I was doing, but I somehow noticed that the often complained about no Spelljammer campaign setting for D&D 5th edition.
Complained about the fact that there was no.
Yeah, I'm like,
right.
Come on.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, because every time they would, okay, we've got a big announcement, here it comes, and
it's not.
It was something else.
Right.
But they, I don't know, because they were listening to our podcast and started feeling bad for me.
I'm assuming that's what it was.
That's probably what it was.
Mm-hmm.
They decided that they would release it, and not just release it, but they're going to release like 3 books.
Nice.
So like, yeah, there's like a new monster manual for it, a campaign setting, and a Dungeons Master player guide for it. So,
and if you don't know what Spelljammer is, it's a world
D&D space.
Yeah, it's D&D kind of in space. You've got ships, but they fly in space. Like they're
Right.
like wooden boats, but they're propelled magically and this and that and whatnot.
Yeah, because I fell in love with Spelljammer because of the SSI game, which
on the computer.
Yeah, on the computer back in the day. I know there's
80s
lots
or 90s.
90s, yeah.
Was it? Okay.
I know there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh, that wasn't a very good game," but I absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's coming out, and then started talking to my gaming group about, hey, this might be a way to get our group back together. I might run a campaign,
Get the band back together.
Yeah, in person, and one thing led to another, and I am now a proud owner, or will be the proud owner. I've ordered it already, the Platinum Edition of the Beetle and Grimm box set for the Spelljammer.
So Beetle and Grimm is a company. They advertise with GameFor back.
Yeah. Yep.
And they make stuff for licensed stuff for D&D.
Right. It's
so when you're using one of these particular
campaign settings. Yeah, campaign settings on steroids. So it has handouts and maps, battle maps, and the edition I have also does full painted minis for all the NPCs and new monsters.
We talked with them at GameHoleCon in Madison years ago.
Yeah, custom GM screens, encounter leaflets that when they stand up, so you can kind of see. I can see the stats, but the players can kind of see what the monsters look like. And
it's fancy business, is
what it is.
If you're looking for fancy accoutrement for your specifically licensed D&D stuff. Yeah. The Beetle and Grimm.
I think the last time I mentioned them was when I finished the Dragon Horde, or what was that? Dragon Heist. Dragon Heist campaign. I had bought the dragon coins through them that were custom or officially licensed coins, so that I could give one to each of my players. So
they've been working with Wizards for a while now. And that's cool.
So I figured there's a couple times I've wanted to use it, but I'd already bought the book, and I was like, I didn't want to double spend. And this time they caught me before I had placed in my pre-order, so
just at the right time.
Yeah.
So you're getting the stuff from them, plus also the books from them as well.
Yeah. So their books are soft covered and are actually kind of broken up a little bit differently.
Interesting.
So that I guess like some of the player shared stuff and DM stuff is a little bit better separated. And
do you like the softcover books better than the hardcover?
I'm usually a hardcover person, but yeah. So that was honestly the thing that almost broke me from not doing it.
Because the books aren't hardcover?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand
but with it being all in like a contained box set, I was like, okay, I can live with that.
Yeah.
They're protected.
It makes sense. I get that.
So,
well, that sounds cool. I mean, yeah, no, I was in Boston. I remember when you sent me messages about the Spelljammer stuff, like the announcement and whatnot and everything. So yeah, that's very cool. I remember Spelljammer I just remember seeing the cover. I would go into my local Walton Books and see all the different books from TSR, all the different things like that. I remember seeing Spelljammer all the time, but I never played that nor the PC game back in the day. But yeah, well, that's cool. Do you know? Do they have like when that's supposed to show up?
It said like late Q3, early Q4. So I'm guessing that's probably around like that September, October timeframe.
Yeah,
maybe Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it could be Thanksgiving. That's true. What else? What else have you been working on?
I've nearly caught up on my 3D printing backlog. I take that back. Nearly caught up on my resin 3D printing backlog. My filament one is still giving me some headaches.
Yeah. Like the printer's not working well, or
yeah, that weird issue that with your piece. And,
where it just stops at one point.
Yeah, and it annoys me, and then I decide that I needed to give it a break so I don't smash things.
Yeah, you don't want to smash things.
Yeah, but resin's been printing really nicely. Knock on wood. So starting to get the caveats down for that.
Yeah.
And see, what else? Oh, and I've been continuing to work on my Don't Look Back demo for TMX.
The Tabletop Minions Expo.
Yes, which is coming up a lot faster than I was thinking.
Yeah,
but
it's going to be June real soon.
Yeah, so, but I found some pretty cool bases that I'm going to be using for
the models?
For the models, and that will look pretty cool. And started talking with Dean about some stuff to do with it and stuff, so... Yeah, it's starting to come together. I still have a ways to go, but yeah, I still kind of like having a deadline because it's a little bit better than just the nebulous of I'm going to work on that. And
yeah, no, I've done videos about that in the past about how sometimes having a deadline is actually pretty useful. It depends on the person, Some people can't handle a deadline, or they just are like, no, that's too much. I just and they maybe go in fits and spurts of all of a sudden the next 3 weekends I'm cranking on it, I'm cranking stuff out. But if I would have had a deadline, I would have been overthinking it, and so people are different, as it turns out. But I guess I kind of in some situation kind of prefer a deadline, because otherwise I'll keep working. I'll just be working on the wrong stuff.
Right. It's hard to. Yeah, I don't focus as well. And,
and
I might not prioritize certain things. And, especially when you get down to like nitty gritty stuff or anything that you're like, I don't really feel like working on the non quote fun stuff.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand that.
So,
well, that's cool.
But yeah, that's been me. How about yourself?
Well, hopefully I will be priming some plastic terrain kits for Necromunda, the Ash Wastes, or is it just Ash Wastes? One of the two. Necromunda box, it's not out yet, but GW had sent me a copy a little early, and then it's a lot of parts. Like, the terrain is a lot of parts. It's astounding how many tiny little parts there are to make this terrain, and so it took a long time to build. Plus, I was also traveling a little bit because I was in Boston, and then I get back, and I'm like, okay, cool. I want to throw some rattle can primer on this, because with terrain kits that are made of plastic, I always want to give them at least a bit of a coat of rattle can primer because it sticks better. I never have any problems with airbrush primer sticking to models, but you're also a little bit more careful with your models than you are with your terrain sometimes. So I think the terrain needs the extra help of having a rattle can, because a lot of rattle can, the ones that I like to use, have like plastic, or have like some sort of technology built into them that says, it fuses really great to plastic. The folks at I think Krylon have Fusion is the name of their technology.
Yeah, it is.
And I forget what they call it. I don't know if they have a specific name for it for Rust-Oleum, but they do say, like, on the can, binds to plastic or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been wanting to do that, but as we were earlier discussing, it has barely gotten above 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's been raining for like the last, mostly on and off, the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The only time it was nice was when I was in Boston.
Yep.
It was that Saturday. It was like 70 and beautiful, and my wife was sending me video of the cat walking around out. Diesel was messing around out in the bushes outside, having a good time. And
I was in Chicago, so it's just it's apparently just us.
Like, no. When we leave,
when you and I headed to Reno, that was like the nice weekend they had.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we went to the Gamma trade show. It was a much nicer week here than it was even in Reno. So anyway, hopefully it's looking like maybe this weekend I'll be able to get those guys at least I just want to put even just a light layer of primer on them. Mm-hmm. And it's not even so much the priming, although priming in the rain is not smart. But the issue is that when it's cold, I've had primer when I leave it outside in the garage to dry, I've had it orange peel on me, which is to say get all weirdly bumpy.
Yeah, like it's almost not fuzzy, but yeah.
Well, I mean, bad primer will go fuzzy, but that's even in the best conditions. But I'm talking about like because I've seen people in the past who are like, oh, you can prime outside anytime you want. Yeah, but they're bringing that model back in the house where it can outgas and dry in warmth, and I don't want to do that because I don't want it to outgas in the house because I'm weird about the smells. So anyway, so hopefully this weekend, and then I can at least get started because I'm just going to give it, like I said, a light dusting of some of this stuff, and then do the rest of it all with airbrush. Mm-hmm. So there's that. I'm going to hopefully make a video about painting that terrain. That's also the plan. Let's see what else. I'm still working on Gloomspite Gits for Warcry. I'm doing them on Twitch. Been painting them on Twitch. I've got 3 goblins riding wolves and like 5 other kind of goblins doing. Well, that's not true. 3 other goblins. 2 of them with bows and arrows. One of them is a squig herder, and then there's 2 squigs. I worked in the squigs last night for the first time, actually. It was kind of fun.
I think your Twitch thing still is saying Storm Fiends.
Really? No,
Yeah.
I thought it was, I'll have to check, because I thought it said Gloomspite Gits.
I noticed last night it says Storm Fiends.
Oh, maybe the email that goes out says that, but
Yeah.
when you go there, it's, I'll have to check that too. I wish that those 2 things were the same. I mean, I guess it's nice that you can make the notification say this and then the actual title say that if you want to, but there should just be a little check mark that says, make them the same, please, and then I don't have to fill out 2 things.
Look at that. See, that's why he's our UX
Exactly.
guy.
So yeah, I'm working on those guys, and then I'm trying to decide on what my next Twitch project is going to be. Initially, it was going to be more Warcry guys for Khorne. I was going to run some Khorne Bloodbound, who are all built. I've got, 17 of them, and they're all even textured and everything, just not primed yet. And that would be a good-sized project. But now there's a part of me that wants to do either a unit, or not a unit, a war band for Warcry of vampires and skeletons, who are, just that nature's friends right there. Isn't it? Vampires and skeletons. They're not nature's enemies. They like hanging out together, as far as I can tell. But the vampires would be from the Crimson Court, which is one of the Warhammer Underworlds boxes that came out within the last year and a half or so.
Okay, yep.
Very cool models. Like there's 4 models in there, 3 or 4 models in there. And then the skeletons would be from one of the earliest sets way back in the days of Shadespire, and that would be the Sepulchral Guard, which I used to have a hard time saying sepulchral, but I've gotten better at. I practiced.
I'm impressed.
I'm practiced in the mirror. So anyway, I could mix those 2 groups together to make a single. What the heck are they called?
Warband.
Yeah, but there's a name for their those other war bands I'm working on right now are also both Warhammer Underworlds boxes, Zarbag's Gits and Rippa's Snarlfangs, and they are part of the Gloomspite Gits. These guys are Soulblight Gravelords. That's the faction name. So both of those boxes are technically part of the Soulblight Gravelords, so they can be mixed together. They can also be mixed with other regular Soulblight Gravelord stuff that Age of Sigmar makes and whatever. That's what's really cool about Warcry right now, is that you can really get into some fun mixing and matching and stuff like that. So I'm either going to work on those guys next, which I would have to build, and then but they're not going to take that long. They're Underworlds models, so they don't take super long. But I either have to do that, or my other idea is to do finished building the last couple of models and then prime and paint my Space Hulk from 2009, back when they did the 3rd edition re-release. Like some time ago.
Wow.
Like
deep cut.
Yeah, well, I mean, Space Hulk was the first game that I played for Games Workshop, but it was in the early 90s, and it was the original 1st edition. It's the version that my friend Peter still uses when he runs it at TMX. Okay. So that's actually, not only is that the same version, that's actually the same copy. Like I originally got into miniatures by playing that game in college with him, that specific actual box. And so these guys are newer models, newer everything, but still it's from 2009, because then they did another version in 2014, which I don't own. It's the same models and the same everything else, that they just tweaked the rules a bit and changed the cover of the box slightly for the worse, in my opinion, but whatever. Nonetheless, I'm thinking about doing that as well, but that will take a little bit more work and take a lot longer too, because there's probably there's at least like 22 just Tyranids alone, and then there's, I don't know, 15 maybe Space Marines. Well, they're technically Terminators. They're big guys.
Huh.
So anyway, yeah, it's a whole bunch of things, but it's a pretty cool set. So thinking about doing that, we'll see. Then otherwise, I also went to Boston.
Yeah.
I went to PAX East. PAX is the Penny Arcade Expo, if you're familiar with the webcomic Penny Arcade, which is mostly about video games, but they're also into tabletop games as well. They've been around for 20 plus years, and sometime in the early-ish 2000s, 2004, 2005, they decided to have like a little mini convention kind of. Yeah. And like they were hoping that maybe 2,000 people were going to show up, and 6,000 people showed up, and they were like, whoa. And then the next year they're like, well, maybe we'll have, 8,000 or 10,000, and then like 20,000 people, and it just keeps growing.
Yeah, like when they first announced they were going to do it, I was like, oh, that's weird, because at the time it was like Comic Cons, and that was about it. I mean, in some table conventions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you had Gen Con and stuff like that.
But yeah, it was like, who are these guys?
Convention?
Yeah.
And it's grown and grown and grown. There's one in Seattle. There's one in Boston. I don't know if they still do the one in Texas or not. They used to. They did one for a while, I thought.
Yeah, I think
they do one in Australia,
yeah.
and I think they do one in Europe. I mean, like and they also do a one that's just tabletop only, and that one's in Philadelphia, usually in the late fall. This one in Boston it is interesting because it's like half and half. It's like half video games and half tabletop. Like when you go into the big like expo area, you walk in and the first half of it is all video games, and then there's this kind of dividing line, and all of a sudden it's all tabletop stuff. And so I went to I wasn't really planning on going necessarily. My wife and I went to PAX in Seattle back in 2008.
Okay.
Also because we had friends in Seattle, so we wanted to kind of visit them as well. It was a little bit of a 2-for-1. But I wasn't really planning on going, but then I had been having conversations a little bit on both Twitch and on Twitter with Jerry. So the two people that head up Penny Arcade are Jerry and Mike. Jerry is a.k.a. Tycho, and Mike is a.k.a. Gabe. Jerry's the writer. And
is that just their like gamer tag names?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there was like a deep story to that, or
I mean, there may be. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But nonetheless, Jerry's more into tabletop gaming, it seems, and they've been streaming some 40K and a bunch of different things on their Twitch channel and such. And so I had been having some conversations with Jerry on, like I said, Twitter, and he's come into my Twitch a couple of times, and I've gone over to their Twitch while they're streaming some tabletop stuff, and I and he was like, hey, we should get together and play a game sometime, and I want to learn the game that you designed, the Rain in Hell. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm assuming you'll be in Boston for PAX. And so I went to PAX, and I demoed the game for him and Kiko is their he's been with them for forever. He's like their head of like visual design, graphic design and stuff like that. They have a whole team of people working, but Kiko's kind of the head of that.
He's been there forever. Right?
Yeah, he's been there forever. And Kiko is also a super nice guy and also a really good painter, though he dislikes doing it. He's really good at it, but he's like, I really don't like doing it, which is interesting. Anyway, so I ran the game for them on Thursday, almost right after I got to the convention, and had a great time, hung out for a couple hours there. and then ended up hanging out with Jerry and their VP of Business Development, whose name is Eric. Hung out with them on Thursday night, actually, at the hotel bar. Eric and I hung out he was at Gamma, the Gamma trade show, and he was also at Adepticon as well.
Yep.
So I hung out with him at both those places and stuff. So yeah, it was great to see those guys. It was great to meet Jerry. It was great to meet Kiko, and they had a fun time with the game and enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun. And Boston was very pretty. The area was like a lot of new stuff, you know. I didn't really get a chance to go by a lot of the old stuff. The area that we were in was mostly new stuff, but it was very cool looking. It's kind of a seaport area, I guess, is where it was. So, yeah, that was what was going on with that. And flights were screwy, but that's about it. I mean, you know, that's just been the case in general these days. When you fly anywhere, your gate's going to change and your times are going to change. And you're like, oh, I thought I had about an hour layover in between here. Now it's 37 minutes. Okay, well, luckily my plane left 20 minutes late, so we'll see how that goes. It's been a lot of that too. So, but yeah, let's see. I think that's pretty much it for me.
Nice.
App updates and such. We're still very busy, although we did just
Yes, we hired somebody.
Right. I mean, they haven't started yet. They'll start
in
next
June.
month.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got at least one new person starting. We've got
Developer, programmer.
Yeah, possibly a second, but we're still kind of looking at that. But yeah, so hopefully we'll be moving forward.
Yeah, so that'll help to make stuff kind of as to go. Like I said, we've been very busy with like regular paying business stuff. So that's like a lot more than we kind of expected, and so there's that.
Good problems to have, but at the same time, unexpected though too. It was, you know.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Let's see here. So the topic of today's podcast is about game mechanics, our favorite and least favorite game mechanics. What are game mechanics? Well, according to our friends at Wikipedia, who are never wrong, by the way.
No. Let the knowledge of the people.
Indeed. The rules that govern and guide the player's actions as well as the game's response to them. A game's mechanics thus effectively specifies how the game will work for the people who play it. So we talked a little bit in the last episode about world building and the story and that kind of stuff a little bit, right? This is the opposite of that. This is the other parts. This is the crunchier parts they're sometimes referred to. Sometimes the story is referred to as the fluff.
Yes, this is how the game actually functions.
Right, these are the rules. There are games out there that are just all rules and basically no world building and fluff. Things like, chess and Othello and Go and checkers. And
there's very few games that are all fluff and no mechanics.
Yeah, I can't think of any. Those are called stories, I think.
Yes.
Those are generally like books, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you still, so you need the game mechanics. You can easily have games without story or world building, but you still need mechanics all the time. So that's important. And a lot of, how much want to say this? A lot of games they will share game mechanics because you can't really like copyright or trademark game mechanics too much. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's certain things. For a while, Wizards of the Coast was able to like patent collectible card games.
Yes.
Yeah, so other collectible card game companies had to pay them a license to be able to use it, but that has since expired from what I understand. I could be completely making all this up, but I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure that all that
I feel
happened.
like I've heard that before, but
there was a huge glut all of a sudden. Like Magic got popular in the 90s, and then everyone was like, well, heck, let's start making some money. And then they did, and then all of a sudden, Wizards of the Coast at one point like raised their hand and was like, oh, by the way, we now have the patent on collectible card games. And everyone was like, wait, what? How'd you get that? And they did, and then all of a sudden, most of the collectible card games dried up. And
to be fair, most of them weren't great.
Oh, yeah, no, most of them sucked, don't get me wrong. But still, there were people making decent money. I had some friends that were really into the Middle-earth collectible card game.
Yep. I just found them this last weekend, my Star Trek TNG.
From Decipher?
I think
it was Decipher.
Yep.
I think they had both Star Trek and Star Wars, I think. Yep. But yeah, So there was a zillion different companies doing that kind of stuff, but that's not exactly a game mechanic. That's more of a game type or something, or I don't know. But like, you can't be like, oh wait, your game, you roll 2d6 to hit. Well, that's what my game does. So you owe me money now. That's not a thing you can do.
Right.
There's not really much that's copyrightable or whatever or trademarkable in gaming mechanics. There are specific like types of charts. If the number is what was the term? Non-algorithmic? Like if the chart, let's say, like if you've got like a Dungeons and Dragons thing and you're like, okay, well, my XP goes from this much to this much to get to this level and this much to this much to get to that level, that you can technically copyright, that progression, but to just say, as you gain more experience, you go up in levels, that you can't. You know what I mean? So but the point is there's a lot of games out there that use a lot of the same mechanics.
Right.
Like in board games, there's all kinds of different types of mechanics that people just know the names of, basically.
Right, like roll and move, where you roll dice and you move the number that the dice say, and then something happens.
Right. Plus, there's also all kinds of other ones that I hear the names of thrown around from time to time, but I don't necessarily know what they mean, like worker placement and area control and things like that. I hear about like, oh, this is a worker placement game, and I'm like, I don't. So you're just getting people hired, or was this? I don't know. Is this a staffing game? That's kind of weird, you know. And so that's the kind of stuff that can be a mechanic. That's probably a little bit higher level as opposed to just like roll 2d6 to hit or something like that.
Right.
You know
that's
what I mean?
when you start getting into the Euro board games and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
yeah, there's a Luminology podcast that it's the guy does some segments on, or used to, on Dice Tower.
Okay.
And it was all about he would kind of explain game mechanics and then explain kind of like what makes that mechanic good or how to do it properly, and then like sometimes like the evolution of it, and
there's a lot to game mechanics, and there's like you can easily, and a lot of what I'm going to say is referencing predominantly, wargaming, miniature games and stuff like that, because that's my main wheelhouse. But and also because me and Vince Venturella are now designing games, so we also have that background. But there's a lot to be said for the way that you do things and what it's trying to simulate in game mechanics.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity of how to blend stuff and make stuff good. It's kind of like I was thinking about it with like music or cooking. Like like anybody can take like an instrument and play like 3 different notes, right?
Sure.
But to make it into a song, and to then also make that song like have a certain I know that it was like a certain minor key. If you have a certain minor key,
music theory,
that gives you like a feeling of dread and stuff, and it's like and when you start to, like getting into that, you're like, oh, okay, there's a lot more to this than
a lot more depth
than just notes being thrown together. And that's kind of what I started learning about game mechanics, is that they didn't just like randomly pick this. There's a lot of thought and depth that goes into it to really make a good game.
Case in point, in games like, let's say, Warhammer 40,000, you may have heard of that. You basically, the 2 players roll off at the beginning to see who gets to go first, and then that's the turn format for the rest of the entire game. You won the roll off? Okay, cool. Now you go first, then I go. And it's not like we each activation, like you do all of your entire army, and then I do all of my entire army, and now turn 1 is done. It's almost like baseball, like you get the top and the bottom of each inning, right?
Right.
So you keep doing that. Then you've got games like Bolt Action, where instead you have a die for each of your units on your team, and your opponent has a die for each of the units on their team, and theirs are all one color and yours are all a different color. And then you throw them in a dice bag, and then you reach into the dice bag and you pull them out. Now, that sounds like it's just like a silly, like, oh, well, I guess this is different than doing it the other way.
It's a way to add randomness.
Yeah, it's a way to add randomness. That's cool. But what it's really doing, what it's really simulating, is the fact that in World War II, you had an amazing fog of war, because you have explosions and smoke in the air from shelling, and you've got dirt in the air and too much noise and all this kind of stuff. So reaching into that bag and pulling out, okay, now these guys I get to go. And then you having to decide, that's more of a reaction to what's going on, as opposed to just like, well, I know I'm going next. You know what I mean? And so that kind of simulation in a mechanic is not just something that's like, oh, this is a cool concept or whatever, or it's easy, I can reach into this bag and put, but it's actually like, why are we doing it that way?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, that's like I said, like I was talking about before about how story and world building are important, but mechanics can add. And like I said, we talked about story and world building. I think it was in our last episode, and that stuff is very important. Don't get me wrong. But mechanics can add enjoyment to the game if they're good mechanics, or they can obviously decrease immersion and fun if they're bad mechanics. Kind of, like it adds immersion when that you're reaching into that dice bag and you're pulling out a thing to see, oh, geez, what's going to happen next? Oh, okay, I get to move a guy. All right, that's cool. Oh, no, they got to move a guy or whatever, as opposed to just like back and forth or whatever. Those types of things. Rules. There are a lot of folks out there, in my opinion. Going to go on a tiny little rant here. There's a lot of folks out there who. The story is the most important thing, and the rules don't matter. And I kind of like story to me is, yeah, it's great or whatever, but rules are the way that I play the game, and so that to me, that's I think kind of important.
Yeah, there's some game mechanics that if I find out they're in the game, I will almost not play it. There's a good chance I won't play it, or I definitely won't enjoy it.
Yeah.
But there can be a game story or non-existent game story, and there's still a good game. Like, someone's going to be yelling at their podcast right now, but there is a board game about winemaking.
Okay.
And Virtology or something. No, that's not even close. Anyway.
Yeah. Board game about winemaking.
Yeah, and it sounds like when you hear that and the even some of the artwork, you're just like, oh my gosh, this looks so no pun intended dry.
Right. Oh sure. Yeah.
But it was actually really fun, and but it was because of the way the mechanics worked out and the gameplay and the speed and everything else. It was just a very well put together game. And I'm like, yeah, but if there's a bad mechanic, you can have a beautiful story, and you're like, oh my gosh, this game is horrible.
Oh yeah, no, I do wonder because I'm not a person who's ever really technically designed a board game, but I do wonder if it is a situation where you come up with a mechanic first, or a group of mechanics, or something like that, and then come up with a hook or a story or a world building, or is it you're like, man, I really want to make a game about tulips? You know what I mean? Is it even sometimes marketing? Like there's a game that I keep thinking about buying for my wife because it's about knitting, and my wife likes knitting. But that game could probably be about anything. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, are the mechanics like, well, obviously the mechanics in this game would be perfect for a game about knitting, or is it not like that? You know what I mean?
I'm guessing that the answer is both.
Sure, why not both?
Yes, that sometimes they're like, oh, we need to make a game about robots, and then they come up with a way to do robots, and then sometimes they're like, it'd be really cool if there was a game mechanic that did this, and then they worked that all out, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like a fun game. Now, what does this fit?
What's it going to be about?
Yeah.
I don't know. How about wine? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, like I said, I think you're right. I think that sometimes the world building can be a little bit more of a marketing thing, which is nothing wrong with that, I guess. But the mechanics are important, and I would say that they're more important in some types of games than others. I would say that mechanics are more important in board games than they are mechanics are more important in board games than they are in miniature games, I think. And miniature games mechanics, I bet you, are even a bit more important than RPGs, don't you think? Because RPGs so much story, you can really kind of go around janky rules.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Yeah. So, because if you've got bad rules in a board game, I don't care how good the story is. The board game is a lot of mechanics. Whereas if you go to the other end of the spectrum, RPGs, it's a lot of story, and it's a lot of it's on the GM's shoulders.
Right, and bad game mechanics you could role play around, but
sure, exactly.
But then being able to role play is technically a game mechanic, isn't it?
Oh, wow, that's deep. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, that's a possibility.
I don't know.
So, what are, as an example, some of your favorite game mechanics? You should give me a game mechanic that you like, and then I'll give you one that I like. How about that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Then do we go through all of our favorites and then our least favorite, or should we kind of mix it up so we don't sound super negative at the end?
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
We'll do one of those.
Yeah.
It'll be a surprise.
It's surprising to me.
See, this will be a great time for me to bring out I don't like completely random games.
Sure, that's fine.
But anyway, favorite game mechanic. So the first one on my list is asymmetric gameplay.
Is this in no particular order?
Yeah, no particular order. I would say
fine.
it's kind of most popular, but not necessarily. And you're like, asymmetric gameplay? That I have no idea.
Yeah.
So asymmetric gameplay means that different sides are not, exactly the same, and they're not exactly the opposite of one another. Like it's not, a game. Chess is a symmetrical game, or checkers
Exactly.
or anything. Both sides have the equal stats, equal abilities, and stuff like that.
Games like Monopoly or all kinds of stuff like that. Like you don't have any special, and actually a lot of games, everybody's kind of equal.
Right. Just because you pick the dog in Monopoly doesn't mean that you
Sure.
get a certain mechanic that helps you out.
Right.
Everyone just picked it because or the battleship because it was cooler than the thimble.
And a lot of games are like that, where it's basically you're all playing a game and you're all kind of the same, and you have to run by the same rules.
Right. So, asymmetric means that there's abilities or rules that are different per choice that you make for who you're taking.
Ones I can think of off the top of my head, and they're all kind of by the same company. Well, at least two of them are.
Okay.
Vast.
Oh, yeah. See, I was going to say Root is a good
Right,
one.
and the other one was going to say was Root.
Yeah,
right.
so that's
Leader Games they're really into the asymmetrical stuff. I don't know if it's just because that's the way they like design. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's very cool in that, like, if you pick this faction, they play a good deal differently than if you pick this faction.
Right. Spirit Island's another one where you can have, and there's even differing skill levels to it, where they're like, this one's really hard to play. This one's easier to play, but this one has a really challenging mechanic, so it's more fun, and that's so. The reason why I like it, so the reason why some people don't like it is that there can be overpowered abilities and teams that
It's hard to balance.
it's not always balanced.
It's certainly not mathematically balanced because not everyone's equal.
Right. There's certain situations where somebody will clearly have an advantage over the other.
Sure, in some situations.
But I always find that those games have a lot more replayability. They last longer. Games don't seem like they're just repeating the same thing with just some random events. Every game is a different matchup and a different scenario that you're doing.
At the very least, every time you could play a different faction, and then
Right.
you're getting basically kind of a bit of a different game.
Right. Yeah. So that's asymmetric gameplay is my top pick.
Gotcha. For me, and again, probably most of my things will be mostly wargaming related. Morale rules, mechanics, and such. Which is weird because when I first started getting into miniature games and things like that, I did not like morale. I did not like the concept of like, oh, well, my miniatures have decided they need to run off the board because they've come under a bunch of fire or they've lost a number of their squad and stuff like that. Like, I'm used to, like, at the time I was much more used to the concept of a video game. Like, no, this guy's going to stay here until he's dead because I'm controlling him. And
Right.
then I'll respawn and it'll be great. But what morale rules are doing in a lot of miniature games is they are, at the very least, they are trying to show some self-preservation, which you definitely do have in war. But in a game like the game that Vince and I wrote, Reign in Hell, those are demons, and they don't really have much in the way of self-preservation. So they don't really have morale rules either. But in games where these are people who are, whether they're professional soldiers, conscripted soldiers, whatever, having something that at least, even if it's just a bare minimum of now they keep their head down. Like they've been shot at enough that they're now pinned, so they're not going to return fire until, what it does is it's a bummer when it happens to you, but as a player who is attacking somebody else, if you can, I might be able to hit them, but just shooting at them at the least is going to give me a good chance of pinning them, so they're not going to fire back as much. It adds more strategy as opposed to just I'm going to run up and shoot them and die.
It adds a way to add that mechanic, that realism.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's so. Again, it's not something that gets used in every game because sometimes you just have, like, if you had robots fighting robots, well, they probably don't have morale because they're robots and they don't care. But like people generally don't want to die too much. So they are going to be like, you know what? I think that I'm going to go because I don't want to be exploded or whatever the deal is, So that's having to deal with that as the controller of your folks, I think adds an extra layer of complexity sometimes, which is nice, but it's not too deep,
Mm-hmm.
So I dig that. That's why as I've gotten older, I do seem to like the concept of morale. I used to be really annoyed when like your Space Marines would run off the board because they took a bunch of fire from a bunch of, I don't know, orcs or something else like that. But now I get the reason. I mean, maybe not so much with, Space Marines is maybe they usually have something called no fear or something like that, and they shall know no fear, so they have a tendency to get to re-roll their morale. But, normal, regular troops have a tendency to be like, well, I'm going to go. So that makes sense.
It's been fun.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been real, but it's not been real fun.
Not been real fun, that's true. Yeah. So what's your least favorite game mechanic? Is that what we're doing next?
Yeah, let's go there.
I got that.
Okay. Targeting by other players. I couldn't find like a good mechanical name for this.
Specific name, sure.
Yeah, but like basically like if there's a way for all the other players to gang up on somebody by random choice or just because you sat in a certain order. So like if I sit to, clockwise of a certain friend who's very good at board games versus sitting clockwise to the guy that's really bad in our group at playing board games, and that directly affects my game all the time.
Right.
That drives me absolutely bonkers.
So you're saying that like if a player realizes, because they're going to probably target you because you haven't gone yet.
That or like like game where like okay I beat everybody in this last game that we played, so we're playing this new game, so they're all going to gang up on me to make sure I don't win this game.
Oh, I see.
That's annoying. Or because I sat to the left of this person, like they're like, oh, the player to your left is the one that you can attack.
Oh, sure, right, yeah.
You can only attack that person, and it's like, oh, great, because I sat next to the guy who's really good at this game.
Right. I've already at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I'm at a disadvantage versus the guy that's sat next to the guy who's never played this game before and has no sense of strategy to themselves. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I mean, like, that's the thing that's always driven me a little nuts about Munchkin. Is that the game has a tendency to do that sort of like Mario Kart blue shell thing, like whoever's about to win, then we're like, no, that person's not going to win, and then everyone just gangs up on them. I mean, it's fine. It's not the worst. I can sometimes knock people's nose at a joint if that's the case.
I can deal with it, but yeah, sometimes it brings stuff that's outside the game into it, and it can just sometimes just kind of ruin the fun of a game.
It's the difference between a game that's more adversarial versus less adversarial.
Right.
Sometimes, yeah. There's games where it's all about who played the best game and won, as opposed to who decided that they were going to gang up and make this person not win. You know what I mean? Yeah, I can see that. That's definitely a kind of a bummer. It's not necessarily a specific mechanic. It's generally kind of dictated by a bunch of different game rules.
Right.
But it still kind of comes out as a mechanic as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. How about you? What's something?
Too many dice. Like, I like dice, don't get me wrong.
Okay.
But there are specific games, again, predominantly in wargaming, where you're like, well, I have 27 orc boys, and they each have 4 attacks on the charge. I have to go buy more dice. I'll be right back. Like that, that in my mind is like, that seems like too many. And there are probably ways to mitigate it. Rules-wise.
I like too many dice.
And this is the thing. That's the thing, is that these lists, some people are going to be like, but I love that thing.
Right.
Or, I hate that thing you like. And it's totally understandable.
See, I like it because for me, if you roll more dice, it takes out the chance of randomness, like a skewed randomness. Like if I roll,
it's less swingy, for sure.
It's less swingy.
Yeah.
So,
but sometimes I think that the swinginess, and that's the issue sometimes with certain games, is that people get real mathy about it because they're like, well, the percentage is this. And you're like, yeah, but I roll ones a lot for reasons. I don't know why. And so, yeah. Now, but for me, just like the physicality of having to try to throw and I got big hands, but like 2 handfuls of dice and then try to figure it out.
There is a point where it does get kind of just
and
silly.
Some people like dig that stuff, and that's totally cool, and that's great. But for me, I'm always like, yeah, if I could... And it's not even just necessarily the number of dice in a specific roll. Sometimes it's the amount of rolls that need to happen to do a thing. Like, again, Warhammer 40,000, there's like, first you have to roll to hit. Then you have to roll to wound.
That's what I'm like, oh my gosh.
Roll to wound, then somebody else rolls something else.
We were rolling back and forth like 5 times to figure out if something hit you.
Right.
And the damage.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I kind of like about like Warcry is it's just like, oh, I'm going to roll these dice. You take 2 damage. There's no saving throw. We don't mess around with that stuff. That's all worked into the number of wounds we have, and there you go.
Right.
So, yeah, it's fewer dice in general for me, I think. Again, I like still having a bunch of dice around. They're fun. Dice are cool, but I don't need to throw that many in a specific game. So there's that.
Yes.
Back to you. What's another favorite of your game mechanics?
Yeah, I like drafting mechanics.
So like getting behind somebody else's car.
Yes,
and
going
fast.
Yeah,
No.
I mean that's a cool one. That's
suppose, sure.
Formula D or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Formula D.
But no, I'm thinking of draft mechanics where basically, just usually like to start off a game or to take items, you basically get choices, and then the person that gets the first choice will then usually now they're at the back of the line, and somebody else might get like some other advantage because they went. There's there's a way of balancing, but there's kind of like a risk versus reward too. Of
right.
Like, okay, well I'm going first, and I really want to take this, but if I take that, then I'm going to have this. But yeah, I just like the. It seems less random, less jaded. That hey, somebody rolled first, so they rolled the higher number on the dice, so they go first. It just feels more fair. Like you're starting with more of an even ground, and that you got a little bit of strategy right from the start to figure out how you were going to play the game.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same thing, but like in Star Wars Legion, like to determine each turn, like who kind of goes first, it's like a bit of a bid kind of a thing, depending on the forces you have. Like these forces you have in your army also come with these specific cards which have these certain values. So you might be able to take this guy who's really good, but he ends up having kind of a low bid card or whatever.
Right.
And then also it kind of also controls like, well, okay, so I bid and I won with this, but that means I have to activate like this guy or whatever and that kind of stuff. And so that kind of like stuff, again, you're right from the get, you are already like kind of strategizing and planning things out, and there's the risk and reward. I think that is cool too. What about like drafting, like in like Magic the Gathering type collectible card game drafting? Is that kind of thing too?
Yeah, you can do that too,
Yeah.
And then kind of the same thing too, right? It's well, I got first choice, but you didn't get to pick all of it, so everybody got a choice, and usually it's like if there's like 6 of you, you start on one side, you pass down, and then the next time down. It starts from left and goes right, and so that person kind of gets 2 in a row, and fantasy football players are like, oh yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it kind of keeps it more balanced, but it gives you kind of a choice of like, oh well, I kind of like these type of players, so you can do some individual customization and your favoritism of how you like to play to kind of influence how you're starting out.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's very cool.
How about you?
For me, I like it's frequently referred to as true line of sight.
Okay. What's the true part?
The true part generally means you actually kind of crouch down and you look from behind your miniature to see if you can see the other miniature and then go, oh yeah, no, I can totally see the top of his head or whatever.
Yeah.
There are games out there that don't use true line of sight. They use maybe more like Battletech is a big one, where like you're playing on a flat mat and you're like, okay, well, this guy can't see him because he's on level 2 and the other guy's on level 1, but there's a level 3 thing here. And you're like, yeah, but according to the rules, it says that if you're close to and it becomes a lot more about math and trying to figure out the differentiation between the heights and all that kind of stuff.
If you take from this point to this point with this laser pointer, it kind of crosses over the red line. So
right, and that's more true line of sight. If I'm just like, hey, I put the laser pointer and fired it over the top of this guy's head and put it at that guy's head, so therefore I can see him. You know what I mean? It's right there. As opposed to like being like, well, according to the rules, this is what line of sight means. True line of sight, I think, has got the benefit, and it also gets you a bit more immersive too, because you're like literally bending down to like the battlefield, like the soldier's eye level, and being like, yeah, I can see that guy.
Yeah, someone who didn't play a lot of war miniatures, when you start getting into that, like the like terrain and stuff, is like, oh, there's a window there, so I'm not going to have my guy stand right by the window.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But then you're like, oh shoot, this guy's stupid head is too big, and and
admittedly there are sometimes arguments and things like that, because there are some games that are like, well, if you can see 50% of a model, well, how are we going to figure that out exactly? You know what I mean? What a lot of games do now is if you can like see head, limbs, body, yes, everything else, no. Like, oh, I can see that guy's gun poking out. Well, then you can't shoot. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or I can see that guy's I don't know, funny hat. But you're like, no, but can you see his head or his face or his leg or his arm or torso?
Right. I mean, they're trying to get it so he's like, oh, I see his earring off his earlobe versus like I can see his head. It's a lot different, but it's hard to.
And it's a situation as well of like with the people you're playing with. You'd be like, "Do I got the range on that?" And you're like, "Yeah." Like they're not going to sit there and go, "Well, I think you're a half a millimeter off." You'd be like, "Yeah, you're good." Just because it makes the game go quicker, it's more fun, as opposed to be constantly like, "No, you should have moved a little bit, like just a hair more."
Yeah, and it usually goes both ways then, because then later on it gets fed back to you.
Yeah,
usually.
Exactly.
You're like, oh yeah, you gave me on the other one. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's good enough for there.
Or the other way where you're like, well, actually, I don't think you have your arc. Your front arc doesn't actually include this. And like, oh, but it should. And that's like, a lot of that.
Technically, you rotated it a little bit when you moved it.
That's always the issue right there. Is when the voice goes, well, like the voice goes higher, and you're like, well, I don't know if it's I'm not sure. Yeah, that's when you know things are going
finger when you do it. Too.
Oh yeah, actually, push up your glasses like I do.
Yes.
Yeah, so True Line of Sight, I kind of dig that just because I think it adds immersion, and it's just fun to be like, hey, my little dude can see your little dude, and I'm going to shoot at him, and that's fun. What about one of your least favorite game mechanics?
So this one is maintenance cost.
And I subscription fees?
Yeah, basically, like stuff, it's like, oh, I've already done this, but now I've got to keep paying for it, and upkeep, it's like, and I kind of group this in with like role playing, like I have to make sure my player eats 3 meals a day, I've got to resupply my arrows and stuff. I was like, I'd rather just pay for 5 gold and just assume that my guy keeps up with the amount of arrows through it. Like,
right, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between like I never have to pay for food or ammo or anything being fixed ever, or the other option is like I have to pay this much for arrows and this much for hardtack and this much for ale.
Yeah,
as opposed to just like, okay, you're in a city for 5 days, you pay 3 gold a day, and there you go. You know what I mean? Like,
that's like the game Sims is when Game Sims first came out, I was like, oh, this is fantastic, and then it got so tedious. I'm like,
micromanagement.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is worse than. Like, this is like real life, but now I'm playing for a game and it doesn't do anything for me. Like,
I have to keep paying like the bills on this guy and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and whatever.
Like,
I already have to do that myself on myself.
And he's got to go to work, and I got to
go to work, and
he's got to get his report in to his boss, and
got to get his pinball machine fixed, and got to put out that fire in the kitchen again and clean up the urine. Yeah,
I understand that they're trying to add some realism, and there's other things like game engine games, it slows down some, the advantages and stuff. But it just seems tedious, and to me,
there are people who are super into that super crunchy, like almost like spreadsheet kind of stuff, But I'm not one of them. I agree with you there. Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
No pre-measuring. I think that is dumb.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Back in the day of like, most of 40K up until 5th or 6th. Maybe it was 6th. I don't know if it was 5th or 6th. I think it was 6th edition finally when they were like, all right, fine, you can pre-measure. So what that means, if you're not familiar with it, is normally like if you're, let's say you've got a guy and he has a gun that has a 24-inch range, and then you go, okay, well, I'm going to measure to see if I can hit that guy over there. Well, with no pre-measuring, you can't measure. So you go, I'm going to fire at that guy over there, and you declare, this is what I'm going to do. And then you measure and go, oh, he was at 24 and a half, and then you didn't get him.
Yeah.
There are some people that think that that's cool. I'm not one of them. Especially because very frequently I'm playing sci-fi games, and I'm going to assume there's a laser rangefinder on my super space gun or whatever the deal is, and be like, no, I can't actually make that shot. But there are games that are still it's going the way of the dodo to some degree, but there are still here and there some games every once in a while where you're like, oh yeah, no, you can't pre-measure, and you're like, really, you're going to do that? Is that's the rule that you're all right? Well,
no, I think it punishes new players,
absolutely,
and it punishes people that aren't familiar. Like if it's somebody else's terrain. Why is that fair that the person gets an advantage because they can measure?
I honestly believe that the reason the Games Workshop stopped doing the no pre-measuring thing was because they produced a very expensive terrain piece called the Realm of Battle, which was 6 2-foot by 2-foot modular hard plastic. Like it became the surface of your table, and you could put them together all kinds of different ways and stuff like that. But they were 2-foot by 2-foot, so it was very easy if you were playing on that 2-foot by 2-foot grid to just be like, yeah, I think that's at least 24 inches because it's just, I mean, it's marked out in 24-inch squares. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden, there was no benefit to doing I got to see whether or not I can shoot or not, and I got to see whether or not I've got the range because they wanted to sell a bunch of these things, which at the time were like $300 when they first came out. Well, people were very probably not going to buy them if they're like, well, but then my friends will be able to cheat, and so will everyone else who comes over and plays on my table. So instead, they were like, oh yeah, no, you can totally pre-measure now. And you're like, oh great, because their board's already measured out in 2-foot squares with this thing. It's a great piece of plastic. Don't get me wrong. I own one. I asked everybody for my birthday one year to give me money, and then I added more money, and then I bought that. And this is back in I don't know late 2000s, but yeah, it would have been a real bummer if you were trying to do the no pre-measuring because it would have been real obvious. So
no, that's a horrible.
Exactly. What's your last favorite game?
My last favorite this one was a tough one. There was a few items I almost picked instead, but I finally decided on simultaneous action selection.
Oh.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
It's a very fancy way of basically saying we all kind of decide what we're going to do, and then we kind of show at once and for the actions.
Oh, like in
like
Star Wars
X-Wing.
X-Wing. Yeah.
X-Wing,
where you turn your little wheels and you get all that set up, and then everybody flips them all over or whatever.
Yeah, Race for the Galaxy is another, and stuff like that. And yeah, there's a lot of cool, fun mechanics that kind of cascade after that, like if like I think in Race for the Galaxy is like if somebody picked this mode, then you also get to do that mode. But so you can kind of gamble of, well, I know so-and-so is going to pick this mode, so I can pick a different mode to do, so you can start, playing some of that stuff off it and everything else. But yeah, I just like the fact that it kind of,
well, it's giving you, instead of me reacting to what you're going to do, it's me having to guess what you're going to do.
A little bit.
Which in like a dogfighting type situation makes a ton of sense,
it makes
right?
total sense for
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, Wings of War.
Well, it was Wings of War originally, and then they changed it to Wings of Glory.
Thank you. Yep. And then,
but that's kind of where that kind of started, at least in my memory. I'm sure there were games before that, but that was a big one.
X-Wing and stuff.
X-Wing and Armada, even all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I like it, and it also means that very little time is sitting around waiting for somebody to go, and then you've got to wait for that person to see what that person
make a decision
did,
to like,
and then decide what they're doing. Everybody's
it's my
kind of
turn?
making a decision.
I guess I should start thinking what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
No, you should have done that ahead of time. But
right.
yeah, this does help to fix that. That's a good point. So,
how about you?
Campaign play. So again, talking about tabletop wargaming and such, campaign play. Instead of just like playing a one-off game where you get together and my guys try to kill your guys and vice versa, I like the concept of like this band, this war band, this crew, this group, whatever, they're going to have to try to make it through 10, 15 missions or whatever we want to do. And as they go along, they might pick up cool new weapons. They might get cool new abilities. They might lose limbs. They might die, that kind of stuff. As opposed to just like, I'm just going to send everybody into the meat grinder and try to win this one game. You have to think ahead and go, well, if I kill off these 3 dudes, some of them might not live. Actually, they'll be out of action at the end of this game, but in the kind of phase in between games, they may actually croak or get damaged real bad. And then, so I'm going to maybe play a little bit smarter, or maybe not just run them into gunfire and stuff. And that's a thing that I really dig. Like we've put that into our first game, me and Vince, and we're putting it in the second game, and Warcry has it, and Kill Team even finally now has it. The original version of not the original version, the 2018 version of Kill Team's campaign was kind of iffy.
But even like the Legacy board games kind of has this. Obviously, role playing
obviously is a
has
big deal.
That. But this was one of the mechanics that I put on my list, and then I was like, oh, Adam's got it already, so I took it back off. But yeah, absolutely, anything that I think it makes your decisions more meaningful and it immerses you, and it's fun to kind of watch things grow, and then it's a good way to kind of start mechanics out very soft and growing mechanics, so that you're like, oh, this player is really cool, and you can sometimes branch which way your player's going, so that you can explore some really fun stuff. And
I agree. Yeah. What's your least favorite game mechanic?
Okay. Easy one, time restrictions. Anything that's like, you have to do this in 30 seconds. I understand there's
almost like a chess clock
time
sort of situation.
Yeah. Like, most of the time, I get the reason why, and there are times where I'm like, oh, it's nice that they can't just spend 5 hours thinking about this. But most of the time, it's like...
I can see the benefit for specifically tournament games.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to get things done. But if you and your friends are sitting around there, like there are certain games that give you those little sand timers,
right.
The little hourglass timers or whatever. But yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's just, I don't care for games that have it. It just, it always seems like it's a crutch to fix something else.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, you can take that mechanic and put it into other games. If you and your friends take forever to play, I don't know, Monopoly or whatever, you could throw that in there and go, okay, it's your turn, and then flip over the little hourglass thing.
Like Major League Baseball, they have the pitch clock now. You have to pitch within a certain amount, and it's like, I understand why they're doing it. They're trying to speed it up, but you're that's to fix another broken mechanic.
Right. Yeah. No, you're not wrong.
Yeah. How's it?
My last least favorite game mechanic are simple alternating activations. We talked a little bit at the beginning about activation stuff in tabletop wargaming. Activations meaning like how obviously you don't just like everybody. All the models don't just go at once. That there's no way to do that. It's not like a video game where, multiple people can be running, each different thing, or there's AI that's running these bad guys, and you're doing, it's a situation of like you kind of have to do things in a turn-based way, so you have to sort of take turns. But that doesn't mean that the turns have to be boring. There are plenty of games out there that are like, well, we're both going to roll at the beginning, and whoever wins gets to go first, and then, like I said, like innings, and then it's first and then second, and then just keeps going like that. And then,
especially when they're like, you don't have the same amount of
same
players,
amount of models, or
and
that
it's like
too.
At the end of every turn, the orc guy gets to go 15 times in a row.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so I like games that, like, I don't even mind because when I say simple alternating activation, I mean like literally you do everything on your team, and then I do everything on my team.
Yeah.
But I don't mind as much you activate a guy than I activate a guy. You know what I mean? Because in that situation, at least there's more reaction. Because you're like, well, you've activated these three guys over there, and I'm now it's my turn. I'm going to activate my third guy.
Okay, you're going to do this whole entire turn, and then I'm going to go and you do your
exactly. That's a bummer,
especially
unfortunately.
on longer things. It just makes the game
boring.
Oh yeah,
big army games. Yeah, and that's kind of the standard. Well, it's the standard for 40K, which is like the biggest. Game
if I can walk away from the game for 30 minutes and then come back and I didn't
usually you have to roll some saving throws or armor saves or something like that.
Yeah,
but there's not a lot of use to you.
You're like, I didn't think about anything for 30 minutes.
No, I just was like, okay, I got a 5+. There's a lot of that. So that kind of simple alternating activation stuff is it's one of the big reasons, that and the fact that I'm just not interested in big army games where I'm pushing around dozens potentially of models anymore. It's one of the reasons I haven't been playing, like Warhammer or specifically Warhammer 40K. At least in Age of Sigmar, every turn you roll again to see. So you might have gone at the bottom of the first turn, and you get to go at the beginning of the second turn, which I know some people just hate because they're like, well, then you get to go twice in a row. And I'm like, well, that's sometimes the way that war works. Right. You know what I mean? Like the idea of like I get to go and then you get to go and then I get to go and then you get to go and then I get to, like, that's not how things work. And so anyway. So there's a lot of different types of mechanics in games, obviously, of all kinds of different types of tabletop games. So if you're interested, you should let us know in maybe on the YouTube comments if you're checking us out over there or something like that. You should let us know what your favorite or least favorite game mechanics are. Is there something that if you see it's in a game, you're like, oh, I'm much more likely to be interested in playing it? Or is there something in a game that you see that rule and you're like, nope, not for me, thanks? That's a good question, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment selection thing, why did I say selection? Comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also keep up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.imgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com.